Alrighty then, this is your host Luffy is cool, and we're here for my first ever blind reading. Hopefully everything is set up fine. I'm doing this audio only for convenience sake, also for editing convenience, but yeah. This is about the story, not really my face, so that's sort of why I'm doing it like this. Now, I don't know how long this is going to take, so we're going to be getting into it pretty soon. This was a Patreon request by a Mr. Josh Triplet. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And the fic he suggested to me is 3 Wishes, the Cutie Mark Crusaders Before They Change the World. Now, from the synopsis alone, it seems something's not as it seems with these 3, and it involves why they haven't got their cutie marks. So, we're going on the journey to find out what it's all about. So, Chapter 1 is called Blood and Family. The porch door slammed loudly, accompanied by the sound of small, hurried hooves clomping up the stairs. "Apple Bloom, that better not be you slamming the door again!" Applejack shouted from the kitchen. Getting no response, she took off her apron and left Granny Smith to continue folding the fritters. "A.B.," she said again, following the muddy hoofprints up the stairs. "A.B., what have I told you about wiping your hooves before you come in the house?" Still, though, she didn't get a reply. As Applejack approached the young filly's bedroom door, she heard sniffling. She pushed the door open slowly and softened her tone. "Hey, Sugar Cube, what's wrong?" "Nothing," Apple Bloom said, wiping her eyes with her forehooves. "Just, foals at school." "What'd they do this time?" Applejack said, sitting on the familiar bed beside the young pony. "The usual blank flank and all that. They saw me and Sweetie and Scoots crash our wagon after we all said we'd get our racing cutie marks." "That's how you got those scratches?" Applejack said, pointing to the muddy whelps on Apple Bloom's shoulder. "Yeah," Apple Bloom said dejectedly. "Hang on a sec, let me go get something to clean that up." Applejack returned a moment later with a couple of wet rags and a bottle of ointment from the bathroom. "All right, go ahead and tell me what happened next," she said while starting to wipe away some of the mud from the injuries. "They said I must just be a big baby and lying about my age if I still didn't have a cutie mark." "Oh, Sugar Cube, you know you can't let 'em get to you. Every pony gets their cutie mark when it's time. It don't have nothing to do with how old you are." Apple Bloom looked Applejack right in the eyes. "Then how come they all got theirs already?" "Oh, like who?" Applejack said, continuing to daub at the cuts on Apple Bloom's shoulder. "Well, Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon both have theirs." Applejack knew the names as 2 of her sister's primary tormentors. She had a talk with Filthy Rich about the bullying already, and while the stallion wasn't disagreeable, it was clear he wasn't exactly involved much in his daughter's life, and wasn't likely to make Diamond change her ways. Silver Spoon was just a lackey as far as Applejack could tell. She'd stop when Diamond did. Now, taking a pause here, I agree. I do think Silver Spoon is the one with the redemption potential at the moment, considering she was the first to applaud after Granny Smith's presentation. That, for me, said it all. And when she stole her smoothie back, or ice cream sundae back from Diamond Tiara in Pinky Pride. Really? And what are their special talents? Apple Bloom never really thought of that. They had their marks, and that's what mattered to the other colts and fillies. But what did they actually do? I guess they're really rich. And you're jealous of that? Applejack frowned as she looked at the cloth she'd been using to clean the wounds. "No, of course not, sis. I don't want to be some snooty rich filly." "Wait," she said, catching her sister's odd frown at the sight of the cloth. "Why are you making that face? Am I hurt bad or something?" No, it's not bad. You just keep getting in so many accidents, I'm running out of clean bandages. Anyways, why are you so worried about them getting their cutie marks already?" "I don't know. Did you ever think that maybe their special talents are just easy and boring, and that's why they got their marks already? Maybe you're taking longer to find yours 'cause it's special and unique, not being rich and snooty like them two." "You really think that might be true?" Apple Bloom said. "Of course I do. I know you're special, and I promise you, one day the whole world will know it too. You just have to be strong till then, you hear me?" Apple Bloom sniffled and tried to dry her eyes a bit more. "Okay. Good. "Now why don't you come downstairs and have a couple fritters and maybe some ice cream," Applejack said, smiling and ushering the filly off the bed and out the door. "I know that always makes me feel a mite better." Apple Bloom gladly followed her sister downstairs and enjoyed a pleasant treat. With a full stomach, it wasn't hard for Applejack to usher her off to bed either. The young filly had already had a busy day, and convincing her to tuck in early on a belly full of ice cream and apple fritters wasn't that difficult. But despite a willingness to go to bed, Apple Bloom's mind was still ablaze with the problems of the day, and she found it hard to sleep. As she was tossing and turning, she heard Big Mac and Applejack start talking downstairs. They were being quiet, but in the absolute silence of a rural farmhouse, even the slightest noise was pretty easy to pick out. She'd heard a lot of these conversations over the years, as her big siblings discussed farm business and other trivia on a regular basis, sometimes late into the night. Most times the soft voices helped her fall asleep, as the reassuring sounds of a family nearby helped drive away any foolish notions of monsters and other fears of the night. This time, though, she couldn't help but pick up the sound of her own name several times. That's happened to me before as well. It was a popular farm saying that curiosity killed the cat, and every time Apple Bloom heard it, she was reassured by the fact she was actually not a cat, but a pony. Said reassurance firmly in mind, she crept out of her room and onto the balcony overlooking the lower floor. There she laid and listened to her siblings below. "I tell you, Big Mac, she's gonna find out soon enough, and if she don't, then some ponyota gonna see her when she gets hurt and bleeding like that and know something ain't right." "Yup." "Or maybe even worse, she's gonna keep getting teased about the cutie mark thing, and every pony's gonna figure it out. I mean, she's still young enough that it ain't too unusual for now, but another year or two and there ain't gonna be no excuses left." "Yup." "You got any idea what we should do?" "Nope." "Me neither, Mac. Me neither." Realizing she'd caught only the tail end of things, and the conversation was now over, Apple Bloom quickly scurried back to her room. Just as she got back to bed, she heard her sister's hoofsteps coming up the stairs. The cat may be doomed, she thought, marvelling at her perfect timing, but Cutie Mark Crusader's secret spies had a nice ring to it. The elation at a successful intel operation lasted only a few seconds though, and was quickly overshadowed by the content of said intel. Needless to say, Apple Bloom didn't sleep very well that night, worrying about just what her sister wasn't telling her. What did Applejack mean about bleeding like that? She didn't know, but she was determined to find out. The next morning, Apple Bloom again used her secret spy skills to pilfer a knife from the completely unattended kitchen and put it in her saddlebags to hide in the clubhouse before school. As soon as Sweetie and Scootaloo showed up, she let them know she was calling an emergency meeting of the CMC right after class. Waiting for class to end, as every fall knows, is the hardest thing in the world though, and the day felt as though it lasted forever. When the last few minutes finally rolled around, all of the Cutie Mark Crusaders were doing little more than staring at the classroom clock, waiting for it to tick over to the magical 3:15 moment when school was let out. As the bell rung, the CMC members were out of the door and down the path towards their secret clubhouse. Yes, a lot of ponies actually knew where the clubhouse was, being pretty visible from several rows, but it was still a secret, because only CMC members were allowed inside. "So what's important, Sweetie Belle asked, that we need an emergency meeting, AB?" "Yeah, Bloom, I'm missing Rainbow Dash's practice for this," Scootaloo said. "You don't think the CMC is important as watching Rainbow?" Apple Bloom said. "Yeah, of course I do, but I don't want to waste my time unless we got something important to do, so what you got?" Apple Bloom, so confident until now, had a moment of doubt. "Do y'all trust me?" "Of course," said the unicorn. "Why wouldn't we?" said the Pegasus. "Well..." Apple Bloom nervously rubbed one forehoof across the other as she stared at the floor. "What is it, AB?" Sweetie said, nuzzling her friend. "It's just, I think something's wrong with me. I ain't normal." "What?" Scootaloo looked at Apple Bloom, head tilted. "I don't think I'm like a normal pony. Something's wrong with me." Sweetie Belle, still physically consoling her, said, "AB, you gotta tell us more than that. We're your friends forever, I promise." Sweetie held up a hoof to her heart. "Me too," Scootaloo said, likewise holding her forehoof to her barrel. "Okay, so," Apple Bloom began, "I heard my brother and sister talking last night when they thought I was asleep. Apple Bloom told the story as she knew it, and then looked at her friends and asked, "What colour do normal ponies bleed?" "Bloom, seriously," Sweetie interjected. "What kind of question is that?" Apple Bloom pulled out the knife she'd earlier smuggled from the kitchen. "What colour do they bleed?" Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle looked at each other, unsure how to handle this. Their friend was obviously going off the deep end, and neither of them knew what to do. "Answer me!" Apple Bloom demanded. "Red, A.B. Blood is red," Sweetie finally answered. "Man ain't," Apple Bloom said, slicing a short cut into her pastum with the knife. Sure enough, the liquid that flowed from the cut wasn't red, but was a dark brown muddy substance. Sweetie and Scootaloo were taken aback, staring in confusion. "A.B., what's going on?" Scootaloo asked. "Me, that's me. I don't bleed right. My sister said as much to Big Mac, and you said it yourself. Normal ponies bleed red." "Bloom, listen to me," Sweetie said, stepping hesitantly towards the nervous earth pony. "Just put down the knife. We can figure this out. It's not a big deal." "Not for you, maybe. You got red blood, right?" I think so." Sweetie tried to remember the last time she cut herself, but drew a blank. "Go ahead, show me." Apple Bloom tossed the knife onto the floor in front of the white unicorn. "I'm not saying you have to hurt yourself much, just a little cut." "A.B., I don't think this is—" "Don't tell me what's right. I bleed mud. That's definitely not right. What about you?" Sweetie Belle looked at the knife on the ground, its cutting edge covered in a slight sheen of what looked like brown clay. Then she looked up at the eyes of her friend, who was questioning her very existence. Taking the knife, she didn't have to think long. "I'm with you, A.B. Cutie Mark Crusaders forever!" she said, as she drew the knife across the top of her foreleg a short distance. It stung, it really did, but then again, so did a paper cut. What really shocked was the luminescent blue glow that seeped out of the wound where blood should be. Sweetie's eyes went wide with shock, and she stared directly at Apple Bloom for answers. "What is this? What's happening?" Apple Bloom was just as surprised as her friend, though. I don't know. I thought I was the only one. My sister talked about how I didn't bleed right, and I still had no cutie mark. I didn't know it was going to be you, too." "What about you, Scoots?" Sweetie asked, her voice dropping to a dazed monotone. "What colour do you bleed?" Scootaloo was in utter shock and couldn't even respond. She just shook her head in response. "Come on, we both found out," Sweetie insisted, moving towards the unusually nervous Pegasus. "What about you?" Scootaloo inched back from the other two fillies, scared of how they were acting. "Come on, Sweetie," Apple Bloom said. "Leave her alone. If she doesn't want to, that's fine." Sweetie turned her head and glared at Apple Bloom. "No," she said in an unusually calm voice. "We all need to know where we stand." She turned again and looked at Scootaloo. "Stay away from me, you, whatever you are," the Pegasus muttered, backing away from the creature with glowing blue blood. "What's the matter, Scootaloo? Are you chicken?" Sweetie Belle said. "Sweetie!" Apple Bloom said, jumping between the other fillies. "What the hey is wrong with you? That's our friend!" Sweetie shook her head to clear it. "Oh no, what did I just say?" "You called Scoots a chicken!" "Oh, no, I didn't mean it," Sweetie said, turning to look at Scootaloo. "I don't know what I was thinking. I'm so sorry, Scootaloo. I'm just in shock. I didn't mean it, I promise." All three fillies sat in silence for a moment, their only sounds coming from the perfectly normal day outside, with wind blowing through the trees, cattle lowing in the distance, and the occasional chirps of nearby birds. Scootaloo wasn't sure what to think. She really wanted to run away and hide, but she also knew these two were a real, actual and forever friends, no matter what Sweetie might have said in a moment of panic. Something was going on, and she knew it didn't matter how fearful you felt. You were only a chicken if you acted on that fear. She had to join her friends in figuring this out. "Cutie Mark Crusaders forever," she said softly. "Right? I really wouldn't be much of a friend if I chickened out now, would I?" "Oh, Scootaloo, I really didn't—" "It's okay, Sweetie. I know you didn't. Just give me the knife and let's get this over with." Sweetie pushed the implement across the floor with her hoof, and Scootaloo picked it up and made a hesitant slash across her pastern as well. What came out was nothing but water. "What does that prove?" Scootaloo said, getting nervous again. "It just means we were wrong. Not all ponies bleed red. I mean, I bet if Rainbow Dash gets hurt, she probably bleeds rainbows. All unicorns probably sparkly, glowy magic goop, too, she said, pointing at the fading blue glow from Sweetie's cut. Sweetie looked down at her foreleg. I don't think so, Scoots. I know blood is supposed to be red. The slight blue glow on the cut seemed to pulse. Still in a state of shock, Sweetie picked up the knife again and brought it back to the same wound. Sweetie, what are you doing? Apple Bloom demanded as the knife floated over her friend's foreleg. I need to know, the unicorn said, and sliced deeper with the knife. As she did so, it grated against something hard. Sweetie, stop! Apple Bloom called. Don't hurt yourself! It doesn't hurt much. Sweetie wiggled and sliced a bit deeper into her foreleg. Surprised herself at the relative lack of pain, she peeled back a piece of flesh. Underneath, she stared at a chromium piston, slowly expanding and contracting with each small movement of her hoof. Probing further, she found more pistons, as well as various struts, pivots, and other linkages where there should have been bones, tendon, and muscle. Over the metal components was the white rubbery flesh she'd just cut through. It seemed to be there only to give her legs shape beneath the skin and fur, as it showed no signs of contraction or other movement like a normal muscle would. It also seemed to be the source of the blue liquid, which oozed surprisingly slowly from where she'd cut, despite being a relatively thin fluid. Barely enough of the blood had been spilled to do more than run slightly down her fetlock, despite the deep cut she'd made. After a moment, Sweetie stopped digging and looked up. She held her foreleg out in front of her friends, prying open the wound with magic so they could clearly see what was inside. How do you explain this? She demanded. The other fillies stared in wonder at the subtly moving mechanisms and had no answer at all. She was worried, Applejack said. Really worried, Mac. Apple Bloom was again laying on the balcony and listening to her older siblings talk. She stayed in the clubhouse for hours after both Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle left, quietly crying to herself off and on, wondering what in the world was wrong with her. Then by the time she got home, she was in trouble with Applejack for being so late. She'd been late before, though, and while her sister was never happy about it, it was usually just a few mild admonishment. This time, though, Applejack had sent her straight to her room and told her she was grounded. By then, Apple Bloom had no will left to resist, and meekly clumped up the stairs and threw herself onto her bed, occasional tears soaking into her pillow. For an hour she heard Applejack pacing back and forth downstairs, hoofs tapping softly against the wooden floor. The conversation had started the second Big Mac walked in the door. When she heard Applejack's frantic words burst out, Apple Bloom herself wasted no time sneaking out on the balcony to listen in, working extra hard to stop her sniffling so she wouldn't be discovered. She said Sweetie was almost catatonic, Applejack continued, muttering nonsense about monsters with bad blood in between fits of tears, and there was a pretty bad cut on her leg. She told me all Sweetie would say about what happened was that it was Apple Bloom's fault. I tell you, Mac, I know rares can be a bit melodramatic, but this weren't one of her normal fits. This was the real deal. She was on the verge of tears, worried about her sister. Yep, Big Mac said. You know the worst part? When she asked me if I had any idea what was going on, and I just stood there telling her I hadn't the foggiest. At least A.B. still weren't back yet, so I didn't have to lie about that, too. Apple Bloom heard sniffling, and her brother's heavy footsteps as he went to hug Applejack. Thanks, Mac. I don't know what to do. When Apple Bloom came home, I couldn't even look her in the eye. I just yelled at her and sent her off to bed for being late. I'm worried, Mac. Do you think A.B.'s figured it out? Do you think she knows she's not a real pony? At that, Apple Bloom couldn't take it anymore. The words stung and cut far worse than any knife, and she burst into tears. Her older siblings heard the sudden sobs from the balcony above them and looked up. Apple Bloom? Applejack said, the fear and realization that she'd been overheard nearly choking the word from her throat. She only got more sobs in return. Oh, Sugar Cube, Applejack said, come on down here. Apple Bloom stood up and slowly plodded down the stairs, sniffling and pausing to wipe her eyes a couple of times on the way. When she got to the bottom, she stood by the door and just stared at her sister and brother, barely even blinking. Oh, A.B., Applejack said, starting to walk towards her little sister. I don't know how much you heard, but I heard enough, Apple Bloom said, stepping back slightly as Applejack tried to hug her. It's okay, Bloom, I promise. Me and Mac are here for you. Apple Bloom stood still for a moment, her breathing fast and deliberate. Then she rushed forward and wrapped her forelegs around her sister and bawled out, What do you mean I'm not real? Oh, it's okay, sugar. You're real, I promise. Ain't nothing wrong, just... I know I bleed mud, but... Apple Bloom said haltingly, still racked with sobbing as she hugged her sister as tight as she could. But I ain't a monster, am I? No, of course not, Applejack said, separating herself from Apple Bloom to look her in the eye. But how can you know I'm a real pony? It ain't right to be made of mud, and you know it, so how can you know I'm real? Big Mac walked over and poked Apple Bloom in the ribs, surprising her just enough to make her stop rambling. You seem real enough to me, little apple, he said, and I reckon I know a thing or two about apples. Besides, Mac continued, winking at her, you ain't down in your sister's honesty now, are you? Apple Bloom knew her sister was the element of honesty, and while she disagreed and even fought with her sister about a lot of things, she knew the only thing stronger than Applejack's honesty was her love for her family. No, I ain't doubting that, she said, hanging her head somewhat. Big Mac put his massive hoof under her chin and raised it to look him directly in the eye. Listen here, sis. I may not know a lot of things, but I do know one. We're a family. That means we stick together no matter what. Being an apple isn't just about your name or your cutie mark, or even the color of your blood. It goes deeper. We're apples down to our roots, and that includes you. So don't you ever start thinking you don't belong, that you ain't real, or that we don't love you more than anything else in the world, okay? Apple Bloom looked at him and nodded. Okay. Good. Now come here, Mac said, wrapping Apple Bloom up in a big hug that left her back hooves dangling several feet above the ground before setting her back down. After Applejack joined in for another group hug, Apple Bloom had mostly stopped sniffing and was feeling a lot less worried. But even if I ain't a monster, Apple Bloom said, why am I made of mud? I guess I should take this one, eh, Mac? Applejack said, looking at her brother. Yup. All right, but why don't we go get some hot cider in the kitchen first? This one might take a while in the telling. So I've told you before what happened to Ma and Pa, but I think I probably left out just how badly I really took it. Me and Mac, we got on with the farm work pretty quickly. Can't reckon we had a choice there, as there's always a lot that needs doing. But while I was being all strong on the outside, inside I was still heartbroken for a long time. Even a year after they were gone, I'd still find myself crying in my pillow like a little filly. Come morning, though, I'd put on a tough face and go start bucking more apples. The problem is, when you bottle your feelings like that, you don't always help you get through 'em. So while every pony else was putting the past further behind them, for me, up in my head, it was just getting worse and worse. One day I was cleaning out one of the barns, and I came across something that made me break down crying on the spot. I'm sure it would have looked quite silly to any pony else, but I was crying over a dang scarecrow. The reason was that Pa and I had been working on it right before he died. We'd made half a dozen or so for the fields that year already, but he figured we needed one more to keep the birds away from one of the far groves. So we were just finishing up the last one when him and Ma passed, and in all the grief and such, I'd forgotten about it. We'd just been starting to put the hay on it, and now what was there had mostly dried out, loosening the vines and causing it to shed. I know it seems a mite silly, but I just couldn't leave it like that. I had to finish the thing. So I started sneaking out to that old barn late at night, or the middle of the day when I was sure Mac weren't around to see me. I felt like a foolish little filly, both for what I was doing and for how I was trying to hide it. Then doubly so, because I kept breaking down crying every time I went near the damn thing. I don't know if Mac or Granny has told you anything about making a scarecrow, but it's a bit more complicated than you might think. A proper farm pony-looking scarecrow takes a few steps, and it's kind of a tradition to do it right. As such, the progress was slow. When you make these things in prime season, the hay is dried just enough that it's done shrinking, but not so much that it becomes brittle. Out of season, I find myself having to tear apart entire hay bales to find a few slightly less dried out strands in the middle. That meant hauling them out of the big hay barn without getting noticed. Then I found myself with a huge pile of loose discarded hay starting to fill the barn where I was working. As I worked and wove small bits of salvaged hay onto it, it started to look more and more like a pony. This reminded me more and more of how much I miss Ma and Pa, though, and one day, as I turned around, I saw the foreleg I'd just finished, and for a brief second I thought it was Pa standing over me. Then I realized I couldn't even remember what his hooves actually looked like. He'd picked me up thousands of times with those hooves, led me to my first day of school with them, even worked on this very scarecrow right beside me with those same hooves, and I couldn't even remember what they looked like. How long were his fetlocks? I couldn't remember even that, and that sense of loss nearly sent me into a panic. If I could forget such common things about my own parents, then I might forget everything about them. Then I had an idea. I was finishing this because it was the last thing Pa had worked on, but I reckon maybe it could help me remember them in more ways as well. That hoof reminded me of Pa? Well, that was good. I figured I could make all the details fit, remember them both. The way Ma's ears always perked up when Pa and Ma came in from the fields for dinner, and how her mane always got into her eyes on windy days, or the way Pa's brow wrinkled when he was pondering something difficult, and that glint in his eyes when he finally figured it out. I knew I wasn't an artist, but I was determined and set to work. It was even slower going after that, partly because of the clandestine nature of it, but also my lack of real skill. Normally that weren't a problem, but once I decided this was about the details, I quickly became a perfectionist, and there ain't nothing slower than an unskilled perfectionist. I think Mac and Granny both knew something was up, as I was getting very little sleep, coming in late at night or even early in the morning. They both left me to it, though. When I finished all the hay, I felt pretty darn proud of myself. I think I might have even smiled a bit, and if I did, it was probably the first time in months I'd done so. Next up, though, was the covering. And for that, I knew I'd have to work in Ma's old sewing room, and that'd be a bit harder to hide. The first day I got up into the sewing room, though, I came across a nearly finished scarecrow covering in the closet. Ma must have been working on it at the same time Pa and I were building that last scarecrow. I've been doing pretty good for the previous weeks, but seeing that made me lose it again. After a while I recovered my wits, though, and cranked up the sewing machine to finish the cover. I ain't no seamstress like Ma was, but it was so close to complete that it only took me an hour or so to finish up the last pieces. After that, I dug around a bit in the closet and found her bag of what we always called scarecrow fixings. That is a bunch of knickknacks that can be used for eyes, manes, tails, and that sort of thing. Well, when I got to the barn, that cover fit just perfect, and I barely had to hammer or tuck anything once it was in place. That never happens. Well, at least not for farm pony scarecrows. This one, though, it was looking just like the best of the craft-type shows I'd ever seen. The only thing off about it was that it had yellowed a bit from the year or so it spent in the closet up in the attic. I thought about maybe dyeing it, but somehow it just looked right as it was. After that, I managed to rummage around in the bag of fixings. Nothing looked right for a mane or tail, but there were these two big buttons. What caught my attention, though, were the red and gold shimmer they had, which instantly reminded me of Pa's eyes. I had just finished sewing them on when I heard the rattle of a wagon coming up the field, so I rushed out the back of the barn and then came trotting up alongside Mac as though I'd been off in the orchards, and walked on with him back towards the house. As we went past the south pond, though, Mac just stopped and sat down. I thought that was a bit strange, but figured maybe he just needed to rest his hooves for a bit. I didn't feel much like talking, so I just stood around the wagon waiting for him to get back up. After a good 15 minutes, though, he still weren't budging. We hadn't said much to each other since I'd been working on the scarecrow, so I tried to break the ice with a bit of a joking question. "What's the matter, Mac? You watching the sunset or something?" "Yep," was all he said. Now, I've been pretty consumed by my own pain for the better part of the year at this point. To my great embarrassment, I don't think in all that time I'd ever really considered how my own brother was doing. We'd talked about it a lot since then, of course, and grown a lot closer because of it. But what I didn't know at the time was that he'd sat by that pond and watched the sunset every single day since our parents had died. That day was the first time I sat with him out there, and we watched as Celestia slowly lowered the sun behind the far hills and forest. As the red and gold of sunset shined across the fields and the pond, this evening breeze came blowing through, rustling all the reeds and rushes. My eye caught on a tuft of red grass that was fluttering in the wind just in front of the pond, and as the water rippled with the gust, small glints of waning sunlight shined through the blades like bright eyes behind a wisp of mane. In that moment I knew I'd found the perfect mane and tail, like Celestia had pointed them out just for me or something. I don't think Mac knew why I suddenly started crying that day, but he leaned over against me, put one leg around me, and we just sat like that until the fireflies came out. The next day I went and gathered the most beautiful tufts of that red grass I could find. I wove and tied it into a long tail and a scooped mane like how Ma used to wear hers. Pretty soon I was finished, and found myself looking at this image of a pony that could almost have been related to me, blending as it did the best parts of Ma and Pa both. It still felt like I was missing something, though, so I dug through the bag for some more accessories. There was an old pair of glasses, but that didn't seem right. There was also a plow harness, some sort of wooden sword, a corncob pipe, which I figured was meant more for snow ponies in the winter, and lastly an old hat with some pink ribbon tied around it. I tried putting the hat on the scarecrow, but it just didn't look right, so I took the ribbon off and tried just the hat. I kinda liked the hook, it still didn't feel right. Then I got an idea, and used the ribbon to tie back some of the mane like I'd seen Ma do when she was going into town sometimes. It was a bit more frilly than I'd normally go for, but it reminded me so much of Ma that I just knew it was right. Then it hit me. It was done. I'd shunted so much of my pain and loss into this project, I'd almost started to feel normal again. Or as soon as I realized it was finished, that this was it, the last time I'd ever work on something with Pa or Ma, all the pain came rushing back. It was like saying goodbye to them all over again. I was once more tossed out into the darkness on my own, and felt like the weight of the whole world was bearing down on my heart, trying to snuff it out. As I lay there in the dust and hay, crying and crying, I kept trying to tell myself it was gonna be okay. I still had Macintosh, I still had Granny, I wasn't really alone, but you can tell yourself some things all you want. Believing them is something else entirely, and at that moment I didn't believe myself one bit. I was still crying when Mac found me sometime after midnight, when him and Greg started to worry about me and gone searching. I think he pretty much carried me back to the house and put me to bed. The next day I didn't even get up except to use the bathroom. I didn't eat, and I couldn't sleep that next night either. In my head, everything had just gone pitch dark, and I couldn't see a way out. I was losing all sight of everything that mattered, and had never felt so lost and helpless in my life. The next day was even worse. Then on the third day, I got out of bed and went back to work. I wasn't better. It was just that the concern for Mac and Granny was making it worse. I didn't deserve their sympathy or their attention. I wasn't worth anything. Nothing was worth anything anymore. I didn't change my mind on that, but went back to work and pretended things were fine so they stopped trying to help me and just leave me alone. Now I'm mighty ashamed of this next bit, but it was getting bad enough that I found myself up on the big barn fixing the roof, looking off the edge all the way down to the ground, and actually wondering if this was high enough for it to be a quick way to end it. Now I can't rightly say if I ever might have done it, but thankfully I didn't have to find out, because the oddest thing I'd ever experienced, at least up until that point in my life, happened. A pink mare offered me a cupcake. Now, I know Pinky right well these days, being one of the elements and all, and her antics don't really come as a surprise anymore. But back then, I'd only met her a couple of times after she'd even moved to town, and that had almost always been at the bakery, the market, or at some town-wide event. Finding her behind me on the roof of my own barn, bouncing up and down while hosting a frosted cupcake with a single lit candle in it was, to put it mildly, quite shocking. Especially when you consider that the only ladder up to the roof was directly in front of me, and I've been staring at it the whole time. I tried to ask her how she got up there, what she was doing, and of course why in the world she was trying to give me a cupcake. All I got out of her was she thought I needed it. When she insisted before I ate it, I had to close my eyes and make a wish. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I think it was something rather rude, and that I just wanted her to go away, which was the only reason I even played along and blew out the darn candle in the first place. Pinky was gone before I even opened my eyes, and all I saw was a cupcake in my hoof with a now extinguished candle. I nearly threw it off the roof at that point, but then I realized that while I may have said one thing just to get rid of Pinky, deep inside I'd actually been wishing quite sincerely for something else. In fact, I'd been doing nothing but wishing for one thing for over a year at that point. I just wanted to see them again. I must have been quite a sight, sitting on the peak of that high roof, sobbing and wailing with a cupcake balanced in one hoof and a roughing hammer in the other. Eventually, though, I had to go down, and I wasn't quite ready to take the express route either, which meant I had to eat the cupcake first, 'cause I certainly couldn't just toss it aside after crying over it like that. It was probably the most food I'd had in a week at that point, and it was delicious. Looking back, I don't think there's any other place or time Pinky could have cornered me that would have actually forced me to eat it of my own accord like that. I swear that May is a lot more clever than we give her credit for sometimes. So I go back to the house, and actually eat a proper dinner that night. I think it was also the first time I'd slept proper since finishing the Scarecrow as well, but that sleep was cut short by Winona barking up a storm sometime right before dawn. Now she's a pretty good dog most of the time, but she still goes off on some random birds or possums here and there, and won't stop yapping until I go chase off whatever she's cornered. I climbed out of bed to go do just that, and quickly realized she was barking right at the porch. I went out and she started leading me off the way from the house and to the old barn where I've been working on the Scarecrow. I hadn't gone back there in a week or so, and figured maybe I'd left the door open and let in some raccoons and whatnot. So we get to the barn and I open the door. The sun's just starting to peek over the hill, so I can see inside pretty well, and the first thing I notice is that the Scarecrow I spent all that time working on is gone. I'm just about to storm in and start bucking everything in sight in a rage when I see something move off in that massive pile of discarded hay I'd built up. Then I hear whimpering, and I go in slowly. In the hay was that old hat I tossed aside, and I can see something is under it, and using it like a blanket. You know what I found under that hat? I find the most precious little filly I've ever seen. She has this bright yellow coat like the first rays of sunshine. Her eyes are shining red and gold just like Pa's did. Her tail is a rich red like fall leaves, and her long mane is held back by a pink ribbon tied into a huge bow just the way Ma used to wear it. I spent a lot of time crying in that past year, but when you reached your hooves out and I hugged you that first time, the tears were from the joy blooming in my heart after its very long and dark winter. And that's when I picked you up, Applejack continued. You wouldn't let go of that hat you've been under, and started crying when I tried to take it away. The only way I got you to go up on my back was by putting the darn thing on my head where you could still hold on to the brim behind. Wait a minute, Applebloom said. Are you telling me that's how you got your hat, too? Sure am, Applejack said, touching the brim of her famously well-worn hat as she winked. And you're saying I'm some kind of scarecrow, Applebloom said, a bit incredulously, that somehow came to life from a cupcake? To be honest, darling, I don't really know how it happened, Applejack said, taking another sip of cider from the mug between her hooves. What I do know is that you're everything one could ever want in a sister. You're the best parts from Ma and Pa, from the whole Apple family, and even Sweet Apple Acres itself. You came out of the love they had, and the love I had for them and this family. From the moment I first laid eyes on you, it reminded me I was the luckiest pony in the world to be a part of this family, and every time I look at you I get to see 'em both again. You're a wish come true, little Bloom, of that I'm certain. Applebloom looked up from her cider to see her sister starting to get teary-eyed again. I guess I'm pretty lucky too, then, she said, getting up and walking round the table, to have a brother and sister like y'all. The three ponies shared another group hug and then sat back down. But why mud? I don't know on that, but I'd like to think that all of us apples got a bit of the acres themselves in our blood. Maybe you just got more than the rest of us is all. I guess that makes some kind of sense, but that doesn't explain Scoots or Sweetie, Applebloom said. Doesn't explain what about them, A.B.? Well, they bleed funny stuff too, but it ain't mud. Wait, Applejack said, startled. What now? Okay, so that is Chapter 1 completed, and, well, I must say, this is quite interesting so far. It should be noted, I don't read many fanfictions, so I don't have a lot of points of reference in all of this. I've only seen the most famous ones like Rainbow Factory Cupcakes and all that, you know, those sort of fics, but holy crap, this is interesting. And I hope I'm not being annoying with trying to give each character a distinctive voice. It just helps me keep interested and keep me reading. And who knows, maybe you like it, I don't know. But yeah, this is a test run so far, we'll see how it goes. I am willing to continue, I really am. Expect Chapter 2, I'm not going to make a promise, but it's coming soon. I'll make another recording when I've got some time. This is all my free time I have today, so I'm going to have to wrap this up soon. That's funny. The author's note made an edit in 2013. I trimmed AJ's story a fair bit to improve pacing. Trimmed, you say? I thought it went on for a while regardless. I wonder how long it was originally. But no, that was really good. Although it started to hurt my throat a bit, putting on that half southern accent for like a whole half a chapter. Okay, so CMC are not normal, just like the synopsis says. But what does it all mean? I'm looking forward to finding out, and I hope you are as well, if this is blind for you. Of course, I will be posting a link to the fic so people can read along in case they can't understand my accent or what I'm saying, and all that other good stuff. So, yeah, I'm Luffy is cool, and I'll see you guys next time.